Okay, let's unpack this. It's Michael A. Horowitz's book, Hope and Despair, Israel's Future in the New Middle East. Our mission is to pull out the key insights from this book. We want to help you get your head around this incredible tension playing out, the shifting geopolitics, this big push for normalization, but also the enduring, really frustrating Palestinian conflict.
And Horowitz brings a very specific viewpoint, which I think is valuable. He's an Israeli geopolitical analyst, works with governments, companies, NGOs. And he's quite upfront about that background. He's aiming for, let's say, honesty and critical thinking, not pretending to be totally neutral, which is, frankly, impossible.
Yeah, fair enough.
His book isn't really trying to rehash old arguments about who's to blame for everything. It's more of I think, a necessary, sometimes painful look at the massive challenges, but also the opportunities that Israel is facing. And importantly, these go way beyond just the immediate security stuff.
And that core tension he talks about, this simultaneous hope and despair, he captures it brilliantly right at the start. There's this amazing symbolic scene he describes, just flying into Dubai.
It's a really powerful way to open, yeah. He talks about the flight path itself, taking off from Tel Aviv, then you're crossing Saudi airspace, a country Israel hasn't normalized with yet, coming in from Jordan.
Wow.
And then descending over some of the world's most critical strategic choke points. He actually mentions overcoming his fear of flying for a moment because the scene itself was just so striking.
And what makes it so vivid is just how close everything is, geopolitically speaking. You're on this normal commercial flight coming from Tel Aviv, and you're landing just kilometers away from Iran.
Right over the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly, descending right over the Strait of Hormuz, where, Iran's Revolutionary Guard operates, constantly challenging the U.S. Navy. It's not some abstract idea. It's a literal flight path that shows just how radically things have or haven't changed, depending on how you look at it.
And that contrast, that juxtaposition, that's basically the whole thesis of the book summed up in one image. You've got the sort of quiet progress of the Abraham Accords, these growing ties happening right alongside these deep, dangerous geopolitical fault lines, the same instability that could just erupt at any moment. So the core message really is that the Middle East is undergoing this huge nonlinear transformation, and it demands a really calm, critical look, especially now after the sort of existential shock of post-October 7th. You just can't navigate what's coming by holding on to the old, comfortable stories.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's maybe start with the big picture, the revolutionary cycle that kind of set the stage for this new Middle East he describes. Horowitz is very clear. The Arab Spring back in 2011, it's not dead. He says it's unfinished.
Yeah, he really pushes back against the idea that it just failed. He argues that's too simple. It was more like the opening act of a much larger, maybe generational struggle for dignity for change.
Like the French Revolution taking a century.
Exactly that comparison. He says, look at France. It took about a century to stabilize as a republic after the initial revolution. That first wave of protests starting in Tunisia, it completely reshaped the 2010s. It overrode older debates like pan-Arabism or Islamism. And maybe the most critical thing that came out of it was the emergence of the Arab Street as this unpredictable, independent force, capable of toppling dictators, capable of completely derailing careful political plans.
And out of that decade of turmoil, these new geopolitical lines started to form, defining these four main camps in the region. The book points out that one of those, the Islamist camp, think Muslim Brotherhood backed by Turkey, Qatar, that camp has largely been defeated, at least in key places like Egypt.
And that defeat was really crucial for the rise of the alternative model. Because where political Islam offered revolution, democratic upheaval, which often ended in chaos or just another form of autocracy, the Gulf monarchies, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they offered something else. Horowitz calls it the most sustainable alternative right now, the petroanarchy social contract.
That's a really interesting phrase. What exactly is this unwritten contract?
It's basically a huge political trade-off. Citizens are expected to be fundamentally apolitical. You essentially delegate all your political rights, your aspirations for freedom to the ruling family. In return, the state guarantees your economic needs are met. Always. It ensures massive stability and prosperity. We're talking huge government subsidies, high salaries for civil servants, great health care, even specific things like government-funded housing for young married couples.
So the dream of economic success, the whole Dubai image as a global hub that replaces the desire for political freedom, the dignity stuff that fueled the Arab Spring?
Pretty much. But Horowitz looks closely at how fragile that model actually is. Absolutely depends on continuous, nonstop economic prosperity.
What if oil prices tank? or climate change policies hit their main income?
Exactly. Those are the big questions. Plus, they have to manage the expectations of this modern, digitally connected, increasingly well-educated young population. The monarchy has to constantly innovate, not just economically, but technologically, to maintain control, to stop those revolutionary feelings from bubbling up again.
Which makes them eager buyers of tech.
Highly motivated buyers, yes. Western technology, partnerships, including, crucially, with Israel.
Okay, so that's the regional picture. Now we need to bring in the international layer, this return of great power competition. It massively shapes Israel's security thinking. Let's start with this idea, this myth of U.S. disengagement. It's widely believed, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a powerful narrative, especially in the Gulf. But Horowitz really emphasizes that the reality is it's more complicated. The U.S. still has the biggest military footprint in the region. Most troops, most bases.
And they sent those carriers after October 7th.
Precisely. Sending two massive carrier groups showed they're still willing to intervene decisively in a crisis. The shift is maybe better described as moving from an era of, let's say, American overconfidence like the Iraq invasion, nation-building attempts to an era of more strategic hesitation. Think of that Obama-era motto, don't do dumb shit.
But that hesitation, even if it wasn't a full withdrawal, it had huge immediate effects, didn't it? Especially for Saudi Arabia. That perceived lack of a strong U.S. response after the 2019 attacks on Abqaiq and Kurai's oil facilities, that was seen as the last straw.
Yeah, the Gulf states felt genuinely let down. They felt they'd paid for American protection, billions in defense deals. Yet when Iran, or its proxies, hit the absolute heart of the global oil supply, an attack that briefly knocked out half of Saudi production, Washington's response felt very muted, very cautious. And that forced the Gulf states to realize, okay, this security guarantee isn't ironclad. We need alternatives. We need to hedge our bets. Which, ironically, pushed them both towards normalization with Israel and towards détente with Iran, brokered by Beijing. That vacuum, whether it's real or just perceived, that's the main thing, reshaping the whole strategic game right.
And this perceived vacuum definitely created openings for others, like Russia. Their intervention in Syria put Israel in a really tricky spot, didn't it? A constant balancing act.
Absolutely. Israel is stuck balancing its historic, essential alliance with Washington against the day-to-day practical need to keep lines open with Moscow.
Why Moscow specifically?
It's crucial for maintaining Israel's freedom to operate in Syrian airspace, mainly to hit Hezbollah arms shipments coming through Syria. Russia controls that airspace, essentially. And Moscow knows how important this is, so they don't hesitate to use that leverage. Horowitz gives this incredible example. During the tensions around the Ukraine war, Russian GPS jammers based in Syria were apparently directed at Israel, forcing pilots at Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's main international airport, to switch to older, alternative navigation systems. It's a very clear signal.
It's basically saying, annoy us and we can mess with your civilian air traffic. Wow.
Precisely. And while Russia is playing that spoiler power broker role, China is playing the long game. They're shifting from just quiet investment to more open geopolitical influence. Their calling card is this policy of non-interference.
Which autocratic regimes love.
Exactly. They hate the U.S. pressure on human rights. And China's big move was brokering that Iran-Saudi détente in 2023, the Beijing Declaration.
So what's in it for China? Why step into that role?
China is this massive trading power. Its future depends heavily on stability in Middle East trade routes and energy flows. They benefit massively if the U.S. is perceived to be stepping back because they can position themselves as this impartial guarantor of economic stability. They're effectively piggybacking on decades of U.S. security efforts. They get the economic benefits of stability without having to pay the enormous military price tag required to actually enforce that stability. It's a smart play, all the rewards, none of the headaches.
Let's shift now to what Horowitz calls the path of hope, which is really embodied by the Abraham Accords. He points out these deals broke a huge taboo that had lasted for decades, but they were also very much a product of specific circumstances. If these accords are the hope, what really made them happen?
The mechanism, fundamentally, was transactional, and it really hinged on Washington. For the Arab partners, Israel was seen primarily as a channel, a conduit to Washington, D.C., rather than being the ultimate prize itself.
Interesting.
And the whole thing was pushed hard by a very hands-on Trump administration. They favored really fast, personal communication. Horowitz mentions Jared Kushner using WhatsApp for direct diplomacy with key Gulf leaders.
Really? What's that?
Yeah, completely bypassing the usual slow, formal State Department channels. It was very unconventional.
And these partners, they came with specific asks, didn't they? Things they wanted from the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. The quid pro quo was central. The UAE got access to advanced American F-35 fighter jets, something the U.S. usually only gives to its closest allies.
Yeah.
Morocco got U.S. recognition for its sovereignty claims over Western Sahara.
Okay.
So these deals showed pretty clearly that the normalization engine really depended on Washington being willing to offer up significant carrots. And that's why Horowitz warns that any major public rift in the U.S.-Israel relationship could seriously slow down, maybe even stop, this whole normalization process.
Yeah.
The real prize, for many, is American backing, and Israel is seen as the most effective way to secure that.
So if the Accords started as this political channel to Washington, what happened when that relationship moved behind the scenes into actual security cooperation?
That's where the real revolution took place. Historically, security tie was often Israel's main point. But then in 2021, the U.S. made this huge political and military shift. They moved Israel into the U.S. military's Central Command, CENTCOM. Previously, Israel had been in the European Command, EUCOM.
Why was it in the EUCOM before? Seems odd geographically.
Well, it reflected the old reality. Many key CENTCOM countries like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Iraq simply refused to be in the same military command structure as Israel.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the Abraham Accords, especially normalization with Bahrain, which is where the U.S. Fifth Fleet is based, and Morocco, that was the final push. Moving Israel to CENTCOM was this massive signal of a completely new regional strategic alignment. It allowed for direct, open, joint military planning in a way that was just impossible before.
And the cooperation wasn't just on paper, it became visible very quickly. We saw those joint exercises, Israeli and American F-35s training together over the UAE, the Enduring Lightning exercise.
Yeah, and it went beyond just standard drills. In 2021, there was the Blue Flag aerial exercise hosted in Israel, and the UAE's Air Force Chief, Vice Marshal Al-Alawi, actually visited Israel openly, met with top commanders.
That's huge.
It was a public display of strategic trust that would have been absolutely unthinkable just a couple of years earlier. And Horowitz points out that these joint exercises often involve practicing scenarios that look suspiciously like a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear program. Complex stuff, coordinating air defenses, paving the way for strike missions.
Which brings us back to Iran. The Iranian threat really seems to be the main engine driving all this security cooperation. It's like Iran is the best salesman for Israeli technology and partnerships.
Without a shadow of a doubt. After the Houthis launched those missile and drone attacks against the UAE in 2022, Israel offered to help with air defenses. And this wasn't just diplomatic talk. It involved selling advanced systems. Satellite images later confirmed Israeli systems, specifically the Barak 8 anti-aircraft batteries deployed in the UAE.
The Barak 8, that's a pretty serious system co-developed with India, right? Why was deploying it publicly such a big deal?
Because it's an advanced integrated system. It's designed specifically for regional defense against the kinds of threats Iran and its proxies pose. Deploying it openly meant the UAE was basically staking part of its national security on Israeli tech and implicitly trusting Israel with sensitive strategic data. It moves the whole relationship way beyond just political handshakes into deep operational interdependence.
And this interdependence goes beyond just military hardware, doesn't it? Into the tech sector, cybersecurity, surveillance. Gulf states seem very interested in Israel's startup nation know-how, maybe for internal reasons too.
This is a really critical and maybe sensitive dual-use area. A key player here is Sheikh Taner bin Zayed, the UAE leader MB's brother. He chairs Group 42, a major AI and cloud company that's actively partnering with Israeli defense tech firms. Taner is seen as the architect of the UAE's whole security and tech vision. And part of that vision, as Horowitz suggests, seems to be building something akin to a comprehensive digital police state, using advanced surveillance to manage the age-old problem of controlling a modern, potentially restless population.
And the book mentions a specific controversial example of this tech being used for control, right?
Yes, the whole controversy around the ToeTalk messaging app. It got hugely popular in the UAE, marketed as secure, but U.S. intelligence later identified it as basically a government spying tool. It got pulled from the Google and Apple app stores after that news broke. Horowitz uses this to illustrate how these kinds of tools, whether they're sold openly or through front companies, can enable autocratic regimes to tighten control over dissent. And Israel has become a go-to place for Gulf states looking to acquire these advanced surveillance and cyber tools, which of course raises big ethical and strategic questions for Israel itself. Does providing these tools ultimately help stability, or does it just sow the seeds for future problems?
Okay, let's talk about the biggest potential prize in this normalization game. The crown jewel, Saudi Arabia. They're seen as the most important next candidate, but getting them on board seems incredibly complex and comes with a huge price tag, especially for MBS politically.
Yeah, the internal obstacles are significant. You've got the powerful, traditional Saudi old guard figures like King Salman himself, who still publicly backed the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, the one that requires a pathway to a Palestinian state. MBS, even with his modernization drive and his reported private criticisms of the Palestinian leadership, he has to be careful. He made powerful enemies on his way up. Remember the coup against Mohammed bin Nayef, the detentions at the Ritz-Carlton? If he's seen as betraying the Palestinian cause too openly, it could seriously destabilize his own position at home.
And the price isn't just regional politics, it involves the U.S. directly. Riyadh is demanding serious U.S. security guarantees and, critically, U.S. support for a civilian nuclear program.
This is really the strategic heart of the whole potential deal. Riyadh wants a civilian nuclear program, yes, but, and this is the key part with flexible conditions, they are explicitly refusing to sign up to the IAEA's additional protocol.
What does the additional protocol do?
It allows for a much more robust monitoring, snap inspections. Basically, it makes it much harder to divert civilian nuclear material for weapons purposes. By refusing it, the Saudis are clearly signaling they want to keep a pathway open to building a bomb relatively quickly if or perhaps when Iran gets one.
So they want U.S. protection and the ability to go nuclear fast if Iran does.
That's exactly the demand. And for Israel, this is a monumental strategic gamble. Giving a green light to a Saudi nuclear path, even a latent one, is terrifying when you think long term. What if there's instability in the kingdom down the road? Horowitz raises the ghost of Iran in 1979. What happens if a future Saudi leader loses control? You could end up with an unstable nuclear-armed Saudi Arabia. The potential long-term risk of this particular peace deal has to be weighed very carefully against the immediate benefits of normalization.
Okay, let's switch gears now quite dramatically to the path of despair. Let's talk about the Palestinian conflict, which just endures. Horowitz makes this interesting point. While there might be fatigue among Arab leaders, they see the conflict as maybe unsolvable, leading to indifference. That's a very deceptive picture when you look at the Arab public.
Yeah, the leaders might show resignation, which allows normalization to happen more quietly. But the massive, intense reaction across the Arab and Muslim world after Israel's campaign in Gaza post-October 7th, that proved this issue is absolutely not contained. The Arab public is still incredibly sensitive to it. It's not a monolith, obviously. But the Palestinian issue can just surge back to the forefront, completely overriding the kind of economic pragmatism that underpins that petromonarchy deal we talked about.
And we know the flashpoint that always ignites this public anger. Tensions over the holy sites in Jerusalem, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque, Haram al-Sharif.
Absolutely. Incidents there cause huge damage to Arab-Israeli relations, often undermining the economic and security logic of the Abraham Accords. And adversaries like Hamas and Iran are experts at amplifying these incidents, forcing even normalizing countries like Jordan to issue really strong condemnations. It shows the clear limits of these new partnerships.
And this underlying tension is made worse by the state of the Palestinian Authority, the PA, in the West Bank. It seems to be facing a real existential crisis of legitimacy.
Totally. The PA's whole reason for being, its raison d'etre, was the Oslo peace process. With that process basically dead in the water for years, its entire purpose has evaporated.
Right.
So it's left deeply unpopular among its own people. It's widely seen as corrupt, ineffective, and worse, as basically a security subcontractor for the occupation, dependent on Israel for money and survival. It's created this incredibly dysfunctional, paralyzed situation.
And the book details these deep splits within Fatah itself. Mahmoud Abbas clearly didn't want to risk losing power, which is why he called off those elections back in 2021.
His fear was absolutely justified. Polls showed he would almost certainly lose, probably to internal rivals like Marwan Barghouti, who's still hugely popular despite being in prison, or maybe Nasser al-Qidwa, Arfat's nephew. It got so bad that Abbas's top advisor, Hussein al-Sheikh, actually had to go visit Barghouti in prison to try and negotiate with him, basically begging him not to run and split Fatah even further. It just shows a desperation to cling on to this increasingly illegitimate status quo.
And on the ground, the PA's actual control seems very weak. Its influence has really shrunk, especially in places like the Jenin and Balata refugee camps.
Yeah, those camps have become hotspots, strongholds for rival groups, especially Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, and these new, very volatile local groups like the Lion's Den. The PA feels it can't really crack down hard on Palestinians who are seen as resisting Israel without losing even more legitimacy.
So they let them operate.
They often turn a blind eye. which then forces the Israeli military to conduct these continuous, high-risk raids to dismantle militant cells. And of course, that just reinforces the Palestinian perception that the PA is powerless and ineffective. It's a vicious cycle.
Now let's turn the lens inward, onto Israel itself. Horowitz spends a lot of time analyzing Israel's own deep identity crisis. The huge protests over the judicial overhaul in 2023 really brought this fundamental tension to the surface, didn't they? The struggle between Israel's Jewish character and its democratic principles.
Yeah, because Israel doesn't have a formal written constitution, that tension has always been managed through political norms, and crucially, the Supreme Court acting as a check on government power. The Judicial Overhaul plan, or the judicial coup, as opponents termed it, was seen by many as an attempt by the governing coalition to drastically weaken the court.
Specifically, its power to review laws.
Exactly. Its ability to review basic laws, which function like constitutional articles and government appointments. Opponents feared this was really an effort to dismantle the democratic checks and balances, allowing the government to prioritize the state's Jewish identity without any meaningful constraints on its own power.
And this internal crisis is amplified by these long-term demographic shifts that are basically irreversible, particularly the growing ultra-Orthodox or Haredi population and also the Israeli Arab population. The Haredi shift is really interesting because, as Horowitz points out, it's driven more by economics than ideology, at least initially.
That's a key nuance he brings out. The Haredim are projected to be maybe a quarter of Israel's population by 2050. And increasingly, they're moving across the Green Line into West Bank settlements. But often, it's not because they've suddenly become fervent religious nationalists.
It's about housing costs.
It's purely about affordable housing. They can't afford to live in their traditional, very expensive neighborhoods like Bnei Brak anymore, so they move to settlements where housing is cheaper. But if this trend continues, it's going to fundamentally change the Israeli right wing.
How so?
It'll force their political leaders, who traditionally focus on things like welfare payments and exemption from army service, to take a much harder line on the Palestinian conflict itself, lining them much more closely with the ideological settler movement, even if their voters move there for practical reasons.
Meanwhile, you had those shocking sectarian riots in mixed Jewish Arab cities like Lod and Acre back in 2021. They were sometimes called the Unity Intifada. They really shattered this long-held myth of coexistence, didn't they? Highlighting deep fears among Israeli Arabs.
Yeah, those riots were an explosion of fear about displacement, about religious provocations at Al-Aqsa, fueled by rising Jewish supremacist rhetoric from some corners. Horowitz shows that even while moderate Arab parties, like Ram under Mansour Abbas, chose to engage politically within the system to try and improve conditions for their community.
Which was a big step.
A huge step.
Yeah.
But the fundamental contradiction remains. He cites the Israeli Democracy Index, which consistently shows this really worrying trend. A large percentage of Jewish Israelis believe that Jewish citizens should inherently have more rights than non-Jewish citizens.
That's problematic for a democracy.
It reveals a fundamental misunderstanding or perhaps rejection of the basic principle of equal rights in a liberal democratic state. It's a deep internal challenge for Israel's future identity.
Okay, part 4 brings us to Israel's big ongoing struggle. The sort of Cold War with Iran. Horowitz paints Iran as this king among ruins, very skillfully taking advantage of all the regional chaos over the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. Iran expanded its influence dramatically after 2001. It really capitalized on the power vacuums left by the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the chaos of the Arab Spring, the rise and fall of ISIS. Iran made a strategic choice: invest heavily in non-state but very powerful proxy forces. Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Iraq and Syria.
To build that land corridor.
Exactly, to build this contiguous ground corridor, stretching all the way from Iran's western border through Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean Sea in Lebanon.
And this expansion is key to Iran's strategy of the Ring of Fire, right?
Yes, the goal is strategic encirclement of Israel. By placing powerful proxies on Israel's northern border, Hezbollah, its eastern border, militias in Syria and Iraq, and now even its southern approaches with the Houthis in Yemen, Iran forces Israel to constantly look in multiple directions, stretching its military and intelligence resources thin.
And part of that is building a second Lebanon in Syria.
A key part, yes. Iran is actively working to establish a major military presence in southern Syria, right up against the Golan Heights, trying to equip local militias there with advanced weapons, creating another potential front line.
Now, the Israeli right often views this whole conflict through the lens of Ze'ev Jabotinsky's old Iron Wall doctrine from the 1920s. How does Horowitz see that playing out now?
Jabotinsky's basic idea was that peace would only come when the Arabs completely accepted Israel's strength, when they realized there was, in his words, no longer any hope of getting rid of us. Horowitz argues that Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy actually took this a step further.
How?
Instead of just building strength and waiting for acceptance, Netanyahu actively worked to erode the conditions needed for a peace agreement. He deliberately marginalized the Palestinian Authority. He worked to keep Hamas and Fatah divided, so that Israel could always credibly claim there was no partner for peace. It perfectly fit the Iron Wall narrative, while allowing Israel to pursue normalization deals with Gulf states without having to make any painful compromises on territory, especially in the West Bank.
But pursuing that strategy, managing this constant tension, leads directly towards the risk of a major collision. And Israel tries to manage that risk through this ongoing high-stakes effort called the Campaign Between the Wars, the CBW.
The CBW isn't one single thing. It's this continuous multi-front campaign of military strikes, mostly in Syria. But Horowitz notes they've also happened in Iraq, the Red Sea, even occasionally inside Iran itself.
What's the main goal?
Primarily to stop Iran and its proxies from gaining too much operational confidence, and critically to prevent the transfer of game-changing weapons, especially precision-guided munitions or PGMs, to groups like Hezbollah. It's a constant high-wire act trying to degrade the threats and maintain deterrence without accidentally triggering the full-scale regional war they're trying to avoid.
And the most immediate, most dangerous conventional threat in that equation remains Hezbollah. The book really details their arsenal as being almost catastrophically large.
Yeah, the numbers Horowitz presents are really quite alarming. They underscore the sheer scale of the threat. While Hamas in the 2021 conflict could fire maybe 200 to 600 rockets a day, estimates suggest Hezbollah could potentially fire between 1,200 and 2,000 projectiles every single day.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It's a scale that would completely overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome and its other air defense systems in a way they've never experienced before. It would force the military into making horrific choices. Do you prioritize intercepting rockets heading for critical air bases and command centers, or rockets heading for densely populated cities like Tel Aviv?
And it's not just rockets. The book mentions Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, mirroring some aspects of Hamas's October 7th plan.
Exactly. The Radwan units are specifically trained and equipped to conduct cross-border raids, seize Israeli towns or kibbutzim near the border, capture military posts, take hostages. After October 7th, Israel simply cannot dismiss that as just a theoretical threat anymore. When you combine the sheer volume of rockets with Hezbollah's drones, their precision missiles, and this ground infiltration capability, a future war with Hezbollah would likely be devastating on a scale Israel has never, ever faced.
And then finally, there's the ultimate strategic challenge looming over everything: Iran's nuclear program. Horowitz describes it as very advanced, deliberately decentralized, and buried incredibly deep underground in places like Fordo and Natanz.
The defenses are immense. Fordo, for example, is built literally inside a mountain. So an Israeli attack on these sites couldn't be a quick, clean surgical strike like the successful operations against the Iraqi reactor in '81 or the Syrian reactor in '07. The word strike is almost misleading here.
It would be, as Horowitz puts it, a protracted war.
Yes, a war requiring enormous conventional air power, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of bombing runs, likely multiple waves of attacks over days, maybe even weeks, just to try and penetrate those deep facilities. And even then, critically, the goal wouldn't be to eliminate the program entirely. That's likely impossible militarily.
Just set it back.
Exactly. The aim would be to cause maximum damage. Maybe you set the program back by 2, perhaps 3 years. But taking that action would almost certainly trigger an immediate, massive regional conflict. You'd have Hezbollah unleashing that huge rocket barrage we just discussed, plus direct missile retaliation from Iran itself. It's the ultimate high-risk, high-consequence scenario.
So if that's the grim path of despair, what does this current moment, the post-October 7th reality, actually mean for the Middle East, according to Horowitz?
He argues that the October 7th massacre was this incredibly bloody, tragic course correction. It shattered Israel's long-held feeling of relative safety. It brutally exposed the fundamental limits of the old status quo approach, the Iron Wall strategy of just trying to manage the conflict indefinitely without ever resolving it.
It showed Netanyahu's strategy failed.
It fundamentally exposed the failure of that specific policy, which relied heavily on keeping the Palestinians divided Hamas in Gaza, the PA in the West Bank, and deliberately marginalizing the PA.
So the crisis now forces this very stark binary choice between two incredibly difficult paths forward.
On one hand, there's the path towards potentially even greater chaos. Horowitz sees this reflected in Netanyahu's apparent preference for exotic tactical solutions for Gaza after Hamas. Things like installing some kind of technocratic, maybe Arab-backed administration, or even ideas floating around about encouraging Palestinian displacement.
Which Horowitz warns against.
He warns very strongly that this kind of approach, which avoids the core political issues, risks collapsing moderate Arab regimes next door, like Jordan and Egypt. They rely on their own internal stability. They can't handle massive new refugee flows or tolerate endless political stagnation on their borders.
And the alternative path,
Yep.
the path of potential hope.
That path involves using this terrible tragedy, this moment of crisis, as leverage to actually restart a meaningful, comprehensive peace process. One that acknowledges the fundamental need for a political horizon for the Palestinians.
That sounds maybe naive after everything.
It might sound naive, but Horowitz argues it's actually a pragmatic necessity. It's recognized even by the remaining moderate Palestinian leaders like Mahmoud Abbas himself, who apparently conditioned the PA's potential return to govern Gaza on exactly that, a renewed peace process with a clear political endgame.
Because just putting the PA back in charge without that
would just recreate all the problems that made it fail in the first place.
Yeah.
Illegitimacy, corruption, paralysis. It wouldn't solve anything long-term.
So this whole deep dive has really been about trying to grasp these incredibly complex forces, the simultaneous rise of genuine hope alongside profound despair. How do leaders actually escape this cycle, where tactical moves keep leading into strategic dead ends?
And that's really the thought that Horowitz leaves you, the listener, with. It comes down to a simple lesson he suggests from chess. Leaders on all sides need to stop being, as he puts it, prisoners of the next move. Meaning, stop focusing only on the immediate tit-for-tat, the next tactical advantage, the next retaliation. Instead, they absolutely must try to visualize the endgame. Where do they actually want this conflict to end up? What does resolution look like? And then, crucially, work backward from that vision.
It's a powerful reminder. If you only focus on blaming each other for the past, you risk just sleepwalking into a future where that same past repeats itself, maybe on an even more devastating scale. We really need to start talking not just about what went wrong, but about what actually needs to happen next.